This is Series 3 of Away, a podcast for anyone exploring change through sobriety. I'm your host, Steph Roberts. This is episode 1 of Series 3. Hello! Welcome. I'm excited to share this episode with you, but I want to start by making a few disclaimers to this series. As always, as a reminder, I speak only for myself. The woman I interview today, Susan, speaks only for herself. We do not speak for AA as a whole, even for our home groups or for anyone else. Also, I am not a doctor. I am not a therapist. I'm trained in nothing. I have a BA in English literature with a minor in political science. I graduated with a high GPA, which is remarkable, not because I'm stupid, but because I was very drunk very often, and my father was dying. In the 19 years since I graduated from college, I have not acquired any new degrees. I took an Italian language class at a little school in a little townhouse for about 6 months. And I read. I finished the Gulag Archipelago, hard for me to say that, at the end of 2018, which marked the last of my nonfiction reading for 6 months. That is a seriously difficult read. In June, I'm planning to read Michael Pollan's most recent book, How to Change Your Mind, What the New Science of Psychedelics Teaches Us About Consciousness, Dying, Addiction, Depression, and Transcendence. I think the title says it all. And hopefully once I've read it, I'll talk about it here. I'm fascinated by the topic, although I personally could never use a psychedelic again. Bill Wilson was actually very interested in it and a part of some of the trials of LSD in the 1950s and 60s before it was made illegal during the period that's referred to as the moral panic of the 60s. Okay, sorry. All that is to say that I don't have any material credentials to back up any of the suggestions I will inevitably make throughout Series 3. My credential is my experience. To that end, I will try to limit my advice to topics on which I have experience. If you've been listening to me for a while, then you know by now that I place a lot of value on experience. In recent years, I've become a lot more pragmatic, less theory, more facts, please. Facts. I think I'm telling you all this to keep myself accountable, be honest. I will always try to base my 2 cents on my own experience. Try is the best I can do because I do love to lecture. Defect? Yes. Ready to let it go? Almost. So that sort of leads into another topic I do want to delve into, and it won't be fully in this episode, but that's guilt versus shame. And I don't know, but maybe I've been wrong to use the word shame when I say things like, let shame be a motivator, something I've said repeatedly in the last 2 series. I've actually been listening to and reading some Brené Brown, and she really says it's guilt we should use, not shame. Guilt as a tool for self-correction. And I agree totally. Her point, I think, is that shame is associated with a pattern of thinking that may be more negative, and guilt with a different pattern, or maybe more behaviorally related. Like shame decreases self-worth because with it we often think things like, I am a bad person. Guilt, on the other hand, is associated more with bad behavior. Again, I just wanted to say that because I've mentioned it a lot, and I'll talk about it a little in this conversation with Susan, the idea of shame. The way I mean it is remembering the feeling of it, not reveling in it, not wallowing in it, but remembering the feeling of it. I know that if I behave in the old ways, I will feel the old feelings. And if I behave in these new ways that AA and sobriety have given me with thoughtfulness and compassion, I will not only feel good about myself and therefore raise my own self-worth. We talk a little bit about that in this episode, and we will certainly go into it in further episodes. So I raise my own self-worth, but I also don't hurt someone else. Okay, that's enough of my rambling. In this first episode of Series 3, I wanted to do something totally different and give you a break from just listening to me. There are hundreds of people I would love to talk to, some famous, some infamous, and others, like my guest on this episode, who have become the heroes of their own stories. Today, I'm going to talk to my sponsee and now dear friend, Susan K. I'll ask Susan to tell you a brief version of her story, but I need to preface it with this. She won't say it about herself. She is a star. I take no credit. She decided to get sober in her late 50s, and that decision was just the beginning. In the past 5 years that I've known her, she has never stopped changing. She continues to seek ways to better herself and the world around her. I'm proud of her every day, and I'm always surprised by her in the best possible way. The only problem is she can be very chatty. She's working on listening. I'm saying that only because I am too, so I hope you'll forgive us because we will sometimes talk over each other. And with that,
Hi, Susan. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. How are you today?
Well, it is my pleasure, and I am doing very, very well today on this rainy Sunday here in New York.
I know, it is rainy. Susan, tell us a little bit about where you're from.
Okay, well, originally from Brooklyn, New York.
Nice.
And I am a transplant. Now I'm living out in Long Island with my family.
Yeah.
So originally from New York. Two New Yorkers.
Yeah. So I want to give listeners a really complete picture of you. So I'd like if you'd start to tell us your story, what it was like, what happened, what it's like now, experience, strength, and hope, like they say in the A&A.
Okay, I've done that before. Let's see. So, childhood. Had a kind of unusual childhood, I guess, for the time. My parents were divorced since I was a very early age, so I never remember my father. And by the way, I'll add this caveat in that none of this part of my story makes me an alcoholic.
Right.
I mean, I just am one, but this was my circumstances and may have added into, what made me turn to alcohol eventually, which was at an early age. So again, they were divorced, but I guess as a child, I never really thought how unusual, although for the time that it was, I did not know many other families that had divorced parents, although I'm sure they were there. I was given a nice, I remember it being happy up until I had a tragedy happen to my sister when I was about 15 years old. She had unfortunately been murdered, which also at that time when I was 15 was obviously a terrible shock to my family. I'm not going to go into details. It was somewhat drug-related. This happened in the early 70s. But I never dealt with it, and neither did my family. So right then and there, you have the makings of some kind of a post-traumatic stress thing going on, and you hear this in so many stories.
Sure.
But even before that, I had tried marijuana and maybe not so much alcohol, but at around that time of this tragedy that happened in my family, I did find the magic elixir alcohol. Yeah. And that did seem at the time to be pretty wonderful. So, yeah, and allowed me to numb, which is, I didn't know it then, but of course, as we'll get into probably later with my friend here, is that numbing, it sounds funny to use the word numbing because, alcohol made me I was already not a shy person, but it sort of just made me be in situations without being nervous.
Right. It enhanced you. Yeah.
Exactly. And that I felt, I guess, I was going to use a funny word like protected, even though I wasn't really protected. But that's the funny thing about alcohol. It tricks you into believing certain things, especially when you're young. And I was very young. I was about 14 or 15 when I started drinking. And throughout my teenage years, there was a lot of drugs and alcohol, a whole lot. And some would say it was the times, but for me, when looking back on it now, I seem to like those drugs and alcohol way more than other people. That could just be how I'm remembering it, but it played its role. It certainly did. And then in my 20s, again, I was thinking about this. 20s, I always loved to drink, and I always looked forward to it, and I always did get drunk. I guess I blacked out at times. I don't remember anything really. There were no repercussions in my 20s. That's the favorite term, no repercussions. I had a great job. I was able to succeed. So that while I really loved going out and drinking, and it was a big part. I don't think I ever went out without drinking, like with my friends in my 20s. Alcohol was always there. It just was always there. And I loved it. I loved it a lot. And even though I would go into work hungover or whatever, I never really thought about it. I never thought about alcoholism. My family, a lot of times in the rooms you hear about people talk about, long line of alcoholics, and I've been to go into AA since I'm a youngster. There was none of that in my family. So even though I'll say that my father and mother did drink, but again, it was kind of like, maybe they were alcoholics, I don't know, but there was no AA in my family, okay? So I didn't know anything about that. I just loved to drink. That's all I knew. Right. Then in my 30s, I did the thing that was expected. I met a wonderful guy. Not that was expected, but that I got married. Well, I got married in my late 20s. I have to sneeze. That's why I sound funny now, but I'm going to try to, see if it wants to come out.
Go ahead and sneeze.
You know how that goes, a little tickle in the nose. But anyway, and I made a lot of major changes. I stopped working for a big, wonderful company. I had a great, great job, just wonderful. And I moved to a house, had a baby. Actually, I moved away from Brooklyn, had a baby, and stopped working all in the same year. So talk about that was big. And talk about isolation, which Now, I didn't really turn to drinking at that time because I don't know. Alcoholism is such a strange phenomena. I don't know what you want to call it, but it didn't. I always loved to drink even then if I could get someone to watch the kids or something, but it wasn't full blown. It kind of was like hanging around. I just always knew that I loved to drink. Any weddings, restaurants, vacations, I was drinking. So it was always still a part of my life, but just not a big part. Again, the same thing probably in my 40s. And when it really started to hit home was in my 50s. That's when the drinking became daily. That's when the drinking became really looking forward to it. Like I would think about it all day. The craving, the obsession of the mind.
There you go.
So that I found myself drinking every day, and trying to control it. Being very upset about the fact that I was doing this to myself, but yet not stopping. Had cancer, and right after my chemotherapy, all I wanted to do was drink. These things are not what you'd call the normal drinker.
Right.
And so that's the way it was. There's a lot more, but you can ask a question.
Right. No, that's great. That's what I wanted, a sort of background of your...
Okay, the progression.
The progression of alcoholism. That it really is sort of how it sounds for a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
It may start, the daily drinking may start a little younger for some, but I do think that it is for most of us a progression over time.
Mm.
So what happened to bring you into the rooms of AA?
So around the time I started drinking daily, of course, I started to feel particularly crappy about myself, and I wasn't looking too good either, and I wasn't doing anything with my life.
Right.
So I did seek help, and I sought out a psychotherapist, which was an excellent decision.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're going to get into this later in this conversation, but I am of the belief that I was self-medicating a lot.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
I didn't really know that, but my therapist, who was very good, could really pin me out within a couple of, because that's not why I went to her. I mean, I knew I was drinking a lot, but I said I didn't know anything about alcoholism.
Right.
In fact, I just did not know. So she did, and she suggested I go to meetings, and of course I was in extreme denial because you weren't taking my alcohol away from me. That was my best friend.
Right.
I mean, no, what was I going to do without that?
Right.
So I dabbled around at a few meetings, and of course I wasn't like them. I'm not like them.
Right.
Which, again, when we get to the meetings, of course I am exactly like them.
Right.
But I didn't see that because I didn't want to see it. But eventually what did happen was I went out with my daughter, who was around probably more than anyone else in my family around me, and noticed my drinking escalating, and had gotten to a point where she was just not going to have it anymore, and said, "Look, Mom, and was crying this evening, and was like crying, and I just looked at her and I said, "Oh my God, what are you doing?" And that was my white light aha moment. Like, it took that. I mean, that was it. I mean, you talk about bottoms, and a bottom is a bottom is a bottom in my mind. I mean, I didn't have to wait for the yets, because the yets I believe would have been there. Absolutely. I didn't know that at the time that when I first went into AA, but I learned that. I learned that if I was going to continue on the path that I was going, I was for sure going to meet a lot of those yets.
Sure.
So every bottom is a bottom, because you will get there one way or another.
Everybody's different. Yeah.
Exactly. But it doesn't mean that, high, low. It's really the same, because we are the same.
So you had a really wonderful shrink, because not all shrinks say, I think you need AA. And that planted a seed. Yeah. And then your daughter was really the point.
Catalyst.
That was it. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So you went to your first meeting when?
Well, as I said, I dabbled in quite a few meetings and could not or would not allow myself to listen, and was in complete denial. I would stop. This is the classic. I would stop for like 6 weeks and say, "You see? You have a problem."
Yeah.
I think we all go through that.
Totally.
But then, of course, I would reward myself and, go out and get some vodka, and I would say, "This is great." Yeah. But again, someone had given me a big book that night. I looked at the big book and said, which we may or may not get into later, or maybe on another episode. And I said, let me take a look at this. Of course, it didn't make a whole lot of sense, but on that very next day, I walked into what is now my home group. I found a wonderful sponsor that night. Should I say? Yes. Okay, I'm speaking to her. Who is just become not only, this doesn't always happen, so I feel, especially grateful, is just a wonderful sponsor. Is your face turning red yet? A wonderful sponsor and a very, very good friend of mine. And that was, it doesn't always happen that way.
Of course not.
But, it did for me. It did for me, and from that moment, I never looked back. I was in.
Wow. I wish that every one of my sponsees had that. I wish that every person in the room had that.
This is not a paid endorsement either.
No. No, but, not with me necessarily. I just wish that
I know.
Everyone I'd ever met and tried to help had sort of had the same feeling as you. But I want to go back a little bit further, back into your story a little bit. And, a thing we talk a lot about in AA and the book talks about is fear, and fear is sort of a primary driver, and why you might armor up, so to speak, why you might numb, why you might put on armor, why alcohol may feel like it's protecting you. That sort of speaks to fear, and it wears a lot of masks. Yeah.
Right.
So,
go ahead.
And then with the end of your story, it's like you're the embodiment of the principles of AA now. You've really done more to change and grow in the 5 years I've known you than most people do in a lifetime. You know, so do you see fear as a part of your story, as a thread in your story, and what do you do now to kind of walk through it?
Well, it's so interesting when you bring up fear because I have listened to all of your podcasts, and when you talk about the resentment. And I found that particularly when we talked about it, because I'm not an angry person. Right. You know, and I always looked at resentment. Although there are people, you know, may annoy me or what have you, and you know me personally. Right. More of my step 4 had to do with fear than anything else. Right. And what was just afraid of just living sometimes. I know that sounds crazy, but I think because of what happened in my past, and again, I don't know, I had a lot of insecurities. Sure. And when I would use alcohol particularly, it makes you less inhibited. And so I didn't have to be afraid because it took that away from me. You know, until I wasn't drinking, and then it would come back like a real boomerang effect. Right. You know, like make me even more afraid so that I drink again, and that whole, you know, going back and forth. So today, because I have the program, I learned a lot of things about myself, and a lot of what I was afraid of, I dare say, wasn't maybe even real. Right. If that makes sense.
Totally. They talk about it in the big book. We also have a disease of perception.
Exactly. You know, so that when I became sober and could see clearly for the first time since I was a child, maybe, and certainly as a child, you know, you have fears that are primal, so that we understand. But I kind of held on to those for a really long time because something affected me as a child deeply.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think these primal fears were very deep within me, and I never grew out of them, if that makes sense.
Of course that makes sense. But you have, throughout the last 5 years, really worked hard and strived to overcome small and large fears. And that's what life is. And it's in big part why I'm so proud of you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and fear is so limiting. You know, again, it's the same thing with being angry or upset about something. I often explain, and I think you've heard me say this, I think we both say this, you know, if nobody's dying and, like, it's not the end of the world, literally, because we walk around thinking it's the end of the world, then you can always, you know, this gets into, I'm sure you're going to talk about it a little bit, the cognitive therapy part of this. You can always switch that thought around. So it can always be half full instead of half empty because you do have that choice. Just the same way, if you pick a program, whether it be AA or another way of coming at, becoming sober, you have that choice.
Right. You can't always change the first thought, but you can change the next action. So when you and I did the steps, speaking of sort of cognitive behavioral therapy, you were still very new. We jumped right in. We talked a lot. We looked at the book. But, you know, it was sort of a loose process in some ways. Mm-hmm. We got to know each other through them. And that is a really wonderful tool in early sobriety, just to get to know another person and connect. Tell me a little bit about how you see the steps now, though, and do they still play a part in your day-to-day life?
Oh, yes. Maybe even more so. Because I think when you're new, you're learning. Okay, so you're in that learning baby stage, and you just, you know, you may make mistakes, you may go back, you may go forward, and, you know, everything may not make sense the same way, but the longer you do the program or give back, go to meetings, connect with people, the more you're learning and the more you can get out of the steps. and the more you can help others. And so it's a wonderful process that keeps going on for me, and I think also for you, continually morphing and changing, but getting better.
Right, and so they have sort of applications even later in sobriety. You can continue to apply some of them.
Wonderfully so.
Right.
It's a way, like you've often heard people say, it's a way of living.
Right.
You can apply it, and also you've heard people say, I wish people who weren't, alcoholics would live by the program, because I don't think it's just for alcoholics. I think it can work for a lot of things.
Yeah, any sort of perception problems, deep-rooted anxieties, it's incredibly helpful.
Exactly. Now, so that's why it's very usable, and as you keep growing and new things come up all the time, because we keep changing.
Sure. So you mentioned a little the cognitive behavioral thing, which I'm really into, and the steps are sort of this really verbose way of doing pretty basic stuff. And I think, in my opinion, one of the things they help us with, and the wording is sometimes difficult on this, they help us a lot with guilt or shame, especially steps 4 and 5 and 8 and 9. And I don't love quoting the big book, obviously, but I will now. In the section we affectionately call the promises, one of my favorite is that we will, quote, not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. I really like that. To me, it means that I can use shame to motivate rather than punish myself.
Oh, yeah, I did enough punishing of myself my whole life. I ain't doing that anymore.
Right. So we can morph it by using, the steps give us an opportunity to take our shame, right, and turn it into a tool to help others. So rather than just wallowing around in it, we can use it to help someone else, and that's a great relief. What's one of so that's a huge tool for me. What's one of the tools you use to keep yourself in check, so to speak?
Well, I just think the thought of returning back to the person I was is just not a good thought, just to put it I have changed so much, and I really like the person I am now, and I like the life I live. I don't have to feel ashamed anymore or sick, or that I can be creative. I could be in a room alone and be comfortable. I could talk to people without needing alcohol to make the situation better. It's a tremendous feeling to live life without that monkey on your back.
Absolutely.
And all I have to do is, because again, I came to the game kind of late. And so, I'm saying, listen, this is wonderful, this world.
So you find like remembering what it was like. Do meetings help you do that?
I like meetings. Yes, I do. I don't have to go to them as often. I don't have to. I would. It's fascinating to me, meetings, because I've always felt like, where in the world do people bare their souls and then other people really genuinely, not everyone, but the ones who are genuine really want to help you.
Right. This is, every guru is talking about this, especially recently it seems, that vulnerability is the path to courage. Change, right?
That's what the meetings are like. Exactly. Yeah. And I have a husband who's not alcoholic, who, when he goes and when he hears speakers, he's so amazed. He's so in awe of the power, or maybe I'm using the wrong word, but it's amazing, and that's what I get out of meetings most of the time, and just the camaraderie, the fellowship. It's nice. It's a very nice
It's an amazing tool. It's one of many, but it really is. And it's in my experience, especially in early years, it helped to remind me of what it felt like when I was drinking. So whenever I sort of forget how bad it was, I think it's a great way to remember, because you hear a newcomer and you're like, oh.
And, it's interesting, because you've heard people say, well, you gotta stay close, you gotta stay at meetings, and I don't know if that's true, but I know that I want to go, and that's enough for me.
Right.
I can't speak to other people, right?
Right.
I know that I like to go. I like to be part of that community, if that makes sense.
Of course that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I'm also really interested, and this is something I admire about you. You're always looking to help others. You're someone who believes in a higher power, even though you haven't labeled it. And with with so many newcomers in the rooms of AA now, many of whom come in resistant to the idea of a higher power, how do you approach the topic of belief if you're asked?
Well, in the beginning, I mean, if someone does have that strong belief, that's great.
Absolutely.
You know, that can be used as long as it's kind and loving and understanding type of religion, if you will. I think it exists. Then that's great. And I would just tell anybody, like, I'll use myself as an example. I didn't really think that much about it. I mean, you could remind me about how I did with steps 1. Well, 1 wasn't obvious, but 2 and 3. I just said, let's just go. Like I didn't belabor it like, oh, is there a God? Maybe I want there to be a God.
Right.
I just knew to do what I had to do, if that makes sense. I knew that something would come if it was going to come. It didn't
you had
worry.
faith. You had faith in possibility. Yeah.
Right, and that's what I think I would convey. That don't get stuck there.
Right.
You know, you often hear people say, "Just use it." I don't think you should use a doorknob, but if you want to use the doorknob,
right.
I don't care.
I mean, I just think that a room full of people who really may not want everything good for you, but they definitely want you to get sober. That's a pretty strong power. In the meantime,
yes,
in the meantime,
power of example.
Yeah, I mean, you're still sort of like defining yours, as it were. Mm-hmm. You know, there's something, but you don't have a label on it, and you're rocking and rolling.
Yeah, I mean, and some days it's more important to me to explore that, and other days I'm like, just let it be, and I'm good either way. I just, goodness, kindness, those are the things I live by, and that's what's more important, because I'm on the earth now, so what I do now is really important to me.
Right. It's not just the promise of salvation. It's like, how is my day-to-day life going to be here and now?
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So you are someone who gives back, and you're always giving out your number, and you're always available to sponsor. You show up to meetings and raise your hand to sponsor, so on. You share, you speak. So you're clearly someone who understands a quote they use in the big book, faith without works is dead, that concept. Tell me a little bit about how that has played out in your life since getting sober.
Well, I do have I currently have a sponsee.
I know.
Who's doing very well.
Yeah.
And that's great. I just live the life. You know what? I am the example. I try to be the example. In everything that I do, just like Step 12. I mean, not to, I'm not stealing anything from Step 12, but that's the real answer. To be that way in and out of the group.
Right.
And
you're an active participant in your recovery and in AA, and then life shows up. So how has the concept taken shape in the rest of your life?
Wow, big question. I mean, especially at things like work. I just recently went back to, I worked all the years that I was home, but let's say outside the home place, and you know this.
Right.
And just being in that situation, and also at home, I might add, just in my relationships with my family, with work, with just strangers I meet, I have a completely different outlook than I used to. And I really mean different. Because I'm not as afraid. We talked about that. So I'm myself. I'm more myself. Things that used to matter so much to me, the judgments, what will they think, or it's all about me, or what can I get? Those things are less and less and less. And that's directly because of the program.
Right. Right. I mean, I see you as someone who, in small ways, every day is reaching out to help, or at the minimum, just be kind to the people in her life, the people who cross her path. Yeah. I mean, giving, I think, is people think it has to be these big gestures, but it's from making coffee at a meeting to being polite to a waitress, even if she's clearly having a bad day, holding a door.
You know what I always told you, like one of my favorite movies, It's a Wonderful Life.
Yeah, I mean.
It's kind of like, saccharine kind of thing, but, it's that's what it is. You just don't know the difference that you can make. This, I really believe this, the smallest little thing you do, if that didn't exist, could change a whole slew of things.
Absolutely.
And also just believing that you're just a little spot in this whole world out here.
Right.
It's not, you're not this big grandiose thing, and so I feel so much better living that way.
Absolutely.
So much better.
Yeah. So
and
go
ahead. Sorry.
My last question is actually sort of to that end. In your 5 years of sobriety, life has in fact thrown a lot your way. There's been sickness, and there's just been a lot.
Yeah.
You got a job for the first time outside the home in 30 years. And you've just you've had some fear. You've done it with gusto anyway. You're very much someone who's like, I choose courage over comfort, and you're uncomfortable, but I do it. You do it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But not just AA, but how has being sober as a whole, like just the whole concept of not having, not just alcohol, but sort of the crutch, so to speak, how has that changed your life?
Well, I think I spoke to it a little bit before with my relationships, to start with my family.
Right.
To be really present, not always thinking about myself or alcohol, because it's very, very selfish. I wasn't doing it to be selfish, but in fact, it robbed them and me of wonderful relationships, and also with other people, and just in the world. Like if I was always thinking about drinking or being hungover, or that became my life in a way. Like I was ruled by it, even though I didn't see it that way. But when that was taken away, I wasn't afraid. I said, well, you know what? I wasn't really living. That's not really living. And now everything is, I know it's going to sound kind of hokey, but it's true. Like it's not even a pink cloud thing anymore, because now it's beyond that. Every day I'm discovering new things I'm interested in. And yes, I am interested in fellow man and what's going on around me. And before I could care less, probably.
Right. Well, you're very firmly rooted in the present now, in a way. You still explore the past, and you use it to help yourself gain insight into your present. Right. As
much as I try.
But you've been, I think what I've seen in you that I'm most impressed by, and what I hope for most newcomers or anyone coming into sobriety of any kind is it's really exactly what you're saying. It's this being in the present, relishing what you have, real gratitude, And it does sound so trite, but
I know, but it's not. I know, but I'm experiencing it. And I'm not the only one. And I walk into a meeting where people, have sobriety and good sobriety, and you'll see it. You just see it.
And
they
live happiness,
and they live
a different level of happiness.
Right. Yeah. They live it. It's not just raising your hand saying, my life is great and I have this and I have that. You can hear from the shares, and you can see and hear what people are saying and doing, and there's a change in their life that affects them. But as I said before, it's affecting so many other lives around them, which is the beautiful thing.
Right. The inside job has these waves of effect, and as you're saying, your family. They get to have you.
Yeah, friends and coworkers.
And you show up.
It never ends. Strangers.
Yeah. But you're showing up for life in a way that when you were sort of racked with obsession and so on,
I didn't care.
Yeah.
Or I was obsessed with the wrong things. Let's put it that way. And I didn't feel worthy.
Right.
This could go on for a long time.
Well, we'll do that in another podcast. I just wanted this one to get to know you.
But a lot of people, especially women, have those feelings, and they don't necessarily turn to alcohol. Maybe they'll be eating disorders or shopping, but it's quite a lot, and it's sad.
I think that's very true for a lot of women, and that's why they have trouble identifying with the way the big book, the language in the big book of it all being ego, anger. When we come in feeling worthless.
Oh, yeah. I did not have a big ego.
Right.
The only thing that I did, if it was sort of ego related, is that I was selfish.
Right.
But I didn't know, as I said.
The thing I like to really point out with that is that you were not selfish. You were behaving selfishly.
Yeah, the acts were. Yeah,
the acts of drinking were, and the choosing drinking over, showing up is a selfish act, but you're not a selfish person.
Correct.
And you did a 180 in habit, but the core of you is good. And what I see is that you rediscovered the good within you.
And you know what? Probably most people. I won't say all, but probably most people.
Yeah.
They just want to be kind and good, but they get lost along the way.
Right. And we find our worthiness in taking care of ourselves and in helping others. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Susan, it was such a pleasure talking to you about this today. Thank you for joining me.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you for a lot of things.
We have plenty of time for that. And I definitely hope you'll come back and we can talk more about, I think, fear and vulnerability and things we see that are really important for women.
Yes.
All right, my dear. On that note, we'll end this episode.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'll be talking to you soon.
Yes, you will.
Bye.
Bye. Again, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Susan today. Leave us some comments. Let us know what you thought. Let me know if you'd like to hear more interviews. I love doing them. It was really fun. She was a perfect first interview for me to, is it wet my chops? Sharp? I don't know the saying. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope Susan helped you. I hope she helped you to remember that no matter what, there is a way.